The next update for Grounded is going to be the biggest ever according to the developer live streams. It was delayed a month due to its size and scope, so it should be even more impactful than the Shroom and Doom update. In a previous video, I discussed what I thought could be included in the new update. With the news that it will be bigger than I initially thought, I wanted to talk about one area that could receive a lot more attention than I originally predicted. In this video, I'm going to discuss the Sandbox, including what new insects, resources, crafting recipes, landmarks, and more could come with it. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, now's a great time to do so you don't miss any future videos. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is show you where the Sandbox is located, just in case you're unaware. It's on a part of the map that is behind the under construction tape. So this is the haze area right here. So here's the middle of the backyard. This is where most of the stuff's been populated so far. This is the haze area. The Sandbox, I'm looking directly at it, is right here. It takes up this area. Then we have an open spot back here. This is the deck or the porch that is attached to the house. So real quick, this is what the Sandbox currently looks like. It is just empty right now. As you can see, there's a cookie and a billy dog floating in here. More likely than not, the sand, I believe, will probably fill up so that these are sitting on top of it. And then as you can also see, there's a pretty deep pit here. So most likely the sand's going to go down. And I would guess there's probably going to be some kind of tunnels that lead under here. I'm not sure why these rocks are here. I never went into this prior to like recently. So there may or may not have been something here in an earlier update. I'm guessing that these are here maybe because there's going to be tunnels there and we're going to be able to get into them. And then real quick, if we run over to here, to this side, so you can actually just see the scale of this. Is a massive part of the yard, and I would imagine that the update for this is going to be quite large, and it's why I think there's a chance that it could come in the next update, because the developer said it's going to be the biggest update ever. So I think they're probably, and because it's near the haze area, I think they're going to finish the haze lab and then maybe work on this, because that would take care of this side of the map, or this corner of the map. As you can see over here, there's a large open area here with nothing in it. More likely than not, and you can see there's some tunnels over there. It's probably likely that they're going to put an anthill over there, or there was an anthill. I did see a video by Sir Sim-Alot. I think he said that there was an anthill over here or something at some point. Can't remember exactly what he said. I just remember him talking about there being something to do with ants over here. So I think it's likely there could be an anthill over here that ends up going underneath it here and connecting to it, and that's how we'll be able to get into it. All right, so now that I showed you where the Sandbox is located and the size of it, as you can see, it was massive. I want to go through the things that I think that can be added to the Sandbox that will make sense. What I did was I did some research. I looked up what types of like insects could be found inside of a sandbox that you would find in your backyard. I also looked at what items would be in there. So of course the toys and stuff that will be in there, that would be most likely fit the bill of being inside of a sandbox. And then I kind of came up with some resources that would make sense to be inside of there. And then craftable items that could be made from those, as well as some landmarks, some status effects that I came up with, and a couple of achievements. All right, so let's first look at the insects that I think could be added in the Sandbox update when it gets updated. And first on the list is going to be a silverfish. Now, you probably have seen silverfish around your house. They're usually found in bathrooms or near drains. They like moist, damp, dark areas. So you'll find them in your shower, bathtub, maybe in your basement if you have a drain down there. But they can also be found in sandboxes. I do remember seeing them in my kids' sandboxes when they were younger. And silverfish are typically passive. That means that they run away from other insects. They're not going to attack you naturally. And if you attack them, they're just going to try to flee. They are nocturnal, so they normally only come out at night. And they're also known to be agile runners, so they're pretty quick in order to keep themselves alive, fleeing from other insects that are predators. They like to avoid light, which makes sense because they're nocturnal. So I think it would make sense to add silverfish to the Sandbox, where they only come out at night. And since they like to avoid light, it would make sense if you had a torch equipped, or if you had the headlamp equipped, that they would flee away from you. So if you're trying to hunt them or kill them in order to gather their parts, it would make sense to have to do it in the dark so they can't see you, and then you can get the resources from them. Next up on the list is going to be a black ant. I mentioned this in one of my previous videos. It's been talked about that they're going to add more anthills in the game over time, so it makes sense with this being the biggest update to date for them to add a new anthill. Also, as I showed, there's a good spot for an anthill back in that corner, and I think it would make sense to add black ants now because they've already showed what looks like black ant armor in the Shroom and Doom update trailer. And also the devs have talked about adding more ants. The black ants, I believe there's something for black ants, placeholders for them, or something for them inside the games code right now. So I think it would make sense to add new type of ant there and have them populate that side of the map for at least now. Could also maybe have at some point in the future having like the black ants attacking the red ants, because typically different species of ants like to kill one another off so that they can take over like the entire area. And of course with the black ants, I think it would also make sense to add the ant queen. Now the black ants would be neutral, except if they see you attacking the ant queen, or if you're taking the eggs from their tunnels. So the Ant Queen I mentioned in my previous video, it's been talked about she may or may not be a boss. From all the research I've done, queen ants are basically passive. They're not going to attack you. In fact, the black ants that are, or the ants that are typically around them will be the ones that protect them. So if we had the Ant Queen, I don't think it would make sense for her to be attacking. She'd be more passive, which means she would basically try to flee from you, while the other ants that are inside the tunnel try to protect her. Fourth insect on the list is going to be earwigs, and I used to call them pincher bugs because they have these little pincer things on the back of them. So they're called pincers, but we used to call them pincher bugs because when we were little, we just didn't know they were called pincers. And they're typically neutral. They don't normally attack you unless you, they won't attack something unless you attack them first. So I could see them being neutral, wherein if you don't bother them, they don't bother you. But if you attack them, they're going to attack you back, kind of like how the worker ants are now, some of the other insects in the yard. They are also nocturnal, so they like to come out at night, and they like to hide in wood. So while they can be found in sandboxes, it would make sense for this kind of sandbox because it's surrounded by wood. It'd be pretty interesting if they could add maybe some crevices in that wood, and that'd be where the earwigs spawn out of, and maybe they come out at night and they just go hunting for food or something in the sandbox during the night, and then they go back into hiding when the sun comes up. They could also maybe go inside of any tunnels that are underneath of it, which we'll get to next in a second. Next up on the list is going to be sand wasps. So as we've seen in the picture, or the background picture for the game, there are wasps in it, and so we know wasps are possibly coming at some point. There's no guarantee, but I think it'll be interesting instead of just having regular wasps that fly around in the air, since we already have both bees and mosquitoes. I think it'll be pretty interesting if they added sand wasps. So what sand wasps do are they're actually neutral, so they don't go out and they won't actually attack you unless you attack them first. But what they do is they burrow down into sandy soil or sand and create nests down there. So basically they would create themselves a little nest down in there, go down there, protect their eggs, come out looking for food and stuff like that. So they do hunt other insects that fly, or other insects. And I think it would be interesting if basically they just didn't attack you, kind of like bees. They don't bother you unless you attack them first, or maybe if you go inside of their tunnels looking for what's inside of there, then maybe then they'll attack you. So that'd be the fifth insect on my list. What could possibly be out of the sandbox? And the sixth and final one that I came up with is centipedes. These would be aggressive, and I think that would make sense to add a new aggressive type of insect to that area. Centipedes are, if you're not aware, they look like they have like 100 legs. They're long with lots of legs. They're pretty quick. They also have poison. They're venomous. So if a human, like a regular sized human person like us, got bit by a centipede, we're probably going to be okay. It's not going to really do much to us. However, if you're shrunk down to a few centimeters in height and get bit by a centipede, I could see it being like how the wolf spiders bite you, or how the stink bugs affect you with the poison gas. So maybe getting bit by a centipede would be similar to getting bit by a wolf spider, wherein that you take poison damage over time. Interesting enough, they do hunt other insects, and two of the insects I found that they hunt are both silverfish and spiders. So it'd be pretty interesting if maybe they tried to hunt the silverfish that were inside of the sandbox. So that could be similar to how the ants try to kill the weevils and how the ladybugs try to kill the aphids. If the centipedes try to eat silverfish, they also do eat spiders. And I wouldn't be opposed to having centipedes wandering the yard and actually killing the spiders, because I'd much rather, well, in real life, I'd much rather face a centipede than a spider, even though they're typically larger than spiders. They usually try to run away from you when you're our size. So I think that'd be interesting to add them. So once again, we had the silverfish, black ants, ant queen, earwig, sand wasp, and centipedes. Those are the insects I came up with. From doing the research, like I said, there were other insects. Like you'll end up seeing some kind of spider inside of Sandbox, and you might see some kind of beetles or other insects. If there's any insects that I didn't have on my list that you think, oh yeah, 100%, like maybe you have a sandbox or had one when you were younger, and there's some kind of insects you saw inside of there, and you're like, I always saw these insects, let me know down in the comments below what other insects you would like to see added, and whether or not they will be neutral, passive, or aggressive. Next up on the list is going to be items that would be like human items that you could find inside of a sandbox. So what I did was I looked at what kind of toys would you find in the sandbox. I did break these up into groups. The group I'm going to talk about now is going to be just items. They're going to be things that you possibly find in the sandbox, and they would drop some kind of resource. There's also a couple more that I'm going to talk about later that I would consider landmarks. So they would be more like the toys that you find around the yard, like the Rash action figure, the yoked girth head, and the Frankenline. So the four that I came up with were a plastic bucket, a plastic shovel, a plastic seashell, and a plastic crab. Now, of course, most of the time in sandboxes, or if you're playing at the beach, you're probably going to have some kind of plastic toys. So of course it would make perfect sense, in my opinion, to have these plastic toys, either have them always in the same spot, or maybe they just randomly appear, or maybe they move around from day to day. So they would like maybe look like there were kids playing in it at some point. So I think that would make sense to have those in there. So next up, let's talk about resources. So what I did was I looked at the insects that I mentioned, the items that I just talked about, as well as what else might be found inside of a sandbox or around a sandbox. So the first thing obviously is going to be sand. And in this case, I would say sand chunks, not sand, because I can imagine that if you could dig all the sand out of there, it would just be basically like an infinite amount of sand with that large area. So instead I said, let's have sand chunks. So this would basically be like digging up clay, and you would have to use a shovel to dig it up, and it would basically be like a wet chunk of sand. So you dig it up, get some sand, and that would be a resource that you could use for crafting. Second's going to be plastic pieces, and I think it would make sense if they were randomly dropped by the plastic toys that are in the sandbox. So the plastic toys that the plastic pieces toys that I just mentioned, the shovel, the bucket, the crab, and the seashell, or whatever other plastic toys might be in the sandbox, it would make sense if over time maybe they were degrading and they drop little plastic pieces, similar to how like the crow drops crow feathers or how there's acorns around the oak tree. I think it would be interesting to have plastic pieces be able to be picked up off the ground or out of the sand and be able to use for crafting. Next up is going to be titanium ore, and you might be saying, why would we be adding ore to the game? And it's going to make sense in a minute because I think it could be used for multiple things. And in this case, I would say the titanium ore would be the first like kind of metal object that's added to the game. I think it would make sense for it to be similar to the sand chunk or the clay, where you have to dig it out with a shovel, since we don't have pickaxes in the game. And I would say that in this case, it would require the acorn shovel plus or the tier 2 shovel, which I'm going to get to later on, in order to harvest it. And now getting to the bug parts. So each bug would obviously drop certain resources. For silverfish, I think it would make sense for them to just drop parts. So when you kill a silverfish, it's going to drop silverfish parts. The black ants would drop heads and ant parts similar to the other ants in the game. The earwigs would drop their pincers, so that would be little pincher looking things that are on their backs. Sand wasps would drop their stingers and their wings. And then we would have the centipedes. Centipedes would drop their head, their legs, their parts, and also their gland. And then last is going to be sunflower seeds. Now, I did not mention sunflowers up to this point, but I think it will make sense to have sunflowers in and around, not in the sandbox, but around the sandbox. And in this case, you wouldn't be able to cut them down, but I think it would be pretty interesting if they added a mechanic where hitting the sunflower with an insect hammer, so you'd have to use a tier 2 hammer, would drop sunflower seeds, or they could just have the sunflower seeds laying around on the ground. But I think it would be interesting if hitting the sunflower actually made like seeds fall out of it. You could use them. And in this case, the only food and drink item that I really came up with from this area was sunflower seeds. So they kind of be like the little acorn bits. In this case, I would say the sunflower seeds could restore 25% of your hunger and 10% of your health, because sunflower seeds are typically thought of as being a health food. So it makes sense if they make you less hungry and also heal you a little bit. So with all those resources mentioned, I came up with a bunch of crafting items. So that's the next thing we're going to talk about is the craftable items. First on the list is going to be glass. Now, it's pretty obvious how we're going to make this. We're going to bake the glass chunks inside the oven. You do this in other games. It's kind of how glass is made. Glass is made from sand. There's some other stuff involved in it, but in this case, we're going to keep it simple and just say baking the glass chunks inside of the oven would give you glass. And with that will come glass pieces. So up to this point, I've seen a lot of people talk about wanting to add windows. And in my opinion, if you're going to add glass to the game, why not make it be like all the other building resources? So right now, like we have the grass walls, grass floors, grass everything. We have stem everything. And I think it would be pretty interesting if we could have glass doors, glass windows, of course, glass walls, glass floors, glass skylights. That way, if you wanted to build like a greenhouse or something, or you wanted to build an entire house made out of glass, you could do so. Maybe you want to build a tower and have a viewing ledge where you walk out on this little path and it's made out of glass, so it's glass floors and glass walls. And of course, you could throw in the half walls and the triangle walls and stuff like that too if you wanted to do that. And I think it would make sense if it was, since insects are probably not going to break it, it would probably make sense if it was like stronger than it would be like the strongest current building material in the game in terms of like having insects attack it. Next up is going to be binoculars. So to craft the binoculars would require glass and plastic. So you'd have to turn the sand into glass, have the plastic pieces, you craft yourself binoculars. I think this would be awesome. It would let you zoom in. So you're like, maybe you build a tower in the middle of the yard, you could look around and maybe you could spot where a specific insect you're trying to find is, or maybe you're looking around for specific resources to see, oh, I just saw the crow fly. Maybe you could see where the crow feathers dropped. And that would be, I did also come up with how you would discover them or find them. So in this case, I would think it would make sense to have the binoculars unlocked by analyzing glass or plastic. Fourth on the list is going to be a metal shovel. This is going to be the tier 2 shovel, so it's going to be above the acorn shovel, and it will be made from titanium ore, plastic, and silk rope. And it will be discovered by analyzing titanium ore or the rotten metal shovel. Next up is going to be a silverfish shield. This will be a tier 2 shield made from silverfish parts, berry leather, and silk rope, and it will be discovered by analyzing the silverfish parts. And I know there was another shield showed in the Shroom and Doom update. Not sure what that's made out of. It might have been made out of black ant parts, but I think it'll be pretty interesting if they added silverfish to add a shield along with them. Next up is going to be black ant armor. This will be a tier 2 armor set, which has a helmet, shoulder guards, and knee guards. And of course, you would discover by analyzing the black ant heads or parts. It would be similar to the current ant armor in the game, but I think it would make sense for it to have better armor because the current ant armor basically it has like 0.5 armor, so it's almost like running around with nothing on. So in this case, it would make sense, I think, for it to be stronger, so have more defensive capability. And not sure what we could use as the buff for it. I don't think it would make sense for it to be the exact same as the other. So maybe it makes you stronger. Maybe it increases backpack spaces you have, or maybe you can just carry more of different things while you have it. And then if you unequip it while you're too much stuff, maybe you become encumbered, which would mean you can't move because you're carrying too much weight. So it could be something like that. If you have any ideas for what the black ant armor buff would be for each piece or for the set bonus, let me know down in the comments. Next up is going to be poison pincers. This will be a tier 3 weapon made from the earwig pincers and centipede gland. So you would discover by analyzing the earwig pincers or the centipede gland. I would like to see the centipede gland be like a rare drop, and then of course the earwigs, because they only come out at night and they're going to be more dangerous than fighting like silverfish or whatever. I think this will make sense, and it'll be a tier 3 weapon, and because it's got the gland from the centipede, it would do some type of poison damage to the insects that you're attacking. Next up, we have the wasp glider. This will be a tier 2 glider made from the sand wasp wings plus plastic, and it will be discovered by analyzing sand wasp wings or by finding the rotten wasp glider, which I'll talk about later. And basically, this will just be a stronger glider that instead of maybe just like letting us float down, we could actually float further away, so we would be able to travel further, and it would have more durability, so you'd be able to fly for longer. Next up, we're going to have another wasp thing, and that's going to be the wasp stinger spear. So this would be a tier 3 spear made from the sand wasp stinger, plastic, and a centipede leg. And it'll be discovered by analyzing the sand wasp stinger. So it'll basically be like the bee stinger, but stronger. It'll be a tier 3 version. Next is going to be centipede armor. This will be tier 3 armor set with a helmet, chest plate, and leggings, discovered by analyzing the centipede head parts and legs. I know in the Shroom and Doom update, they showed an armor, and everybody, including myself, thinks it's roly-poly armor. But you never know. If they add centipedes, maybe that could be the centipede armor. That would be equivalent or better than the ladybug armor. So right now, it seems like most people, once you get the ladybug armor, people just get lazy, and that's what they use most of the time. I know some people have said that they switch back and forth depending on what they're doing. But I think for the most part, if you're just wandering around and you want to be the safest, it's the safest thing to do is just to wear ladybug armor, because it's going to give you the best defense, and it also heals you over time. 2 more things on the list. First is going to be the SPF 100 smoothie, and what this would do will be prevent sunburn for 2 minutes, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, and it'll be made from the titanium ore, sunflower seed, and berry chunk, and it'll be discovered by analyzing sunflower seeds. So I was looking up what's sunscreen made out of. So sunscreen is typically made out of some titanium dioxide, I believe, which you get from titanium ore. I think it would make sense if maybe you take a titanium ore piece, sunflower seed, and the berry chunk, because sunflower oil is actually used in organic suntan lotion, and drinking those will prevent you from getting sunburn. Like I said, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then last but not least is going to be the combat burst. This will be a tier 2 explosive made from the wasp eggs, fungal growth, and a dry grass chunk, and it'll be unlocked by purchasing it from Burgle for 5,000 raw science. Next, I want to talk about landmarks. So, of course, every new biome typically has some kind of landmark in it. And I came up with 5 different landmarks that I think would make sense to be in and around the sandbox area. First up is going to be the Sandcastle Lab. So, like I said earlier, there was at some point a sandcastle in the game, but they took it out, so now there's nothing in there. If you're going to put a lab in there, it will make sense to maybe have the lab be underneath the sandcastle. So, inside the sandcastle, I will put the Desert Burgle chip. And what that would do is when you take it back to Burgle, it would unlock the crafting recipe for the glass doors, the glass windows, the glass walls, the glass floors, and the glass skylights. So it'll be similar to finding the Haze Lab chip, which unlocked most of all the new building pieces that came in the Shroom and Doom update. There would, of course, be some raw science. I think it would be cool if there was a couple combat bursts in there, so you found those. Granola bars, obviously, lab notes, and then the cassette tapes, so it could progress the story a little bit longer. Also, as I mentioned, since sand wasps tend to burrow under the ground, it would be pretty cool if there was 1 or more sand wasp tunnels inside of the sandbox area, and they could be similar to the anthills where you can wander around in there, and like I said, if you don't bother anything, they won't bother you. But also what would make sense to have in there would be like the rotten wasp glider and then wasp eggs. So you would need the wasp eggs to obviously make the combat burst, And then the Rotten Wasp glider you could use to fly around, or you could research it and it would unlock the crafting recipe in order to make the regular wasp glider. Next up, something I already talked about, that'll be a new anthill. And the black anthill would be, I think it would be interesting if it was in the area that was next to it and then connected to the sandbox so you could get in and out of it. And this would be the primary place to get titanium ore. And it would also have a mint chunk, the rotten metal shovel, so you could find that and research it in order to unlock the crafting recipe for that. Ant eggs, of course, and maybe a new scab. And then 2 more toys that I think would make perfect sense to have in there and could also be landmarks would be a dump truck. Now, I said Tonka dump truck because Tonka is one of the most popular toy companies that makes vehicles like that for children. It could just be a dump truck, but the Tonka trunk is the big yellow one, so if they can't use the name Tonka, they could just have a big yellow dump truck. And I think it'd be interesting if that would be a new landmark, so it would count towards the as a natural explorer mutation, and also it could have like a new scab in or around it. And then last but not least would be a Tonka bulldozer, so similar to the dump truck. I know when I was a kid and played in a sandbox, I always had a dump truck and a bulldozer, so I could use the bulldozer to push the sand into the dump truck, and I could see something like having like 100 raw science being there, so those would be just landmarks that are inside of the sandbox. Next up is going to be status effects. So currently the only area that well, there's 2 areas. I guess the koi pond has an effect where you go underwater and you can't just breathe water forever. And of course the haze area, if you're not wearing a gas mask, you just start taking damage because of the toxic air that's around you. I think it would make sense for the sandbox area to have 2 different status effects. First would be higher thirst drain. So it will be 25% faster during the day. So at night it will be normal, but during the day it will be 25% faster. And of course this, in my opinion, this makes sense because if you're walking around in the desert or you're on the hot beach and it's just sunny out, you're going to get thirsty faster than if you're just sitting in the shade somewhere. And then the second status effect will be sunburn. And sunburn would cause health to not regenerate. So basically, once you get sunburn in the sandbox, your health would not regenerate naturally like it normally does. Or even if you eat anything, you basically have to get out of the sandbox or get into the shade. And what this would do is your teen will become sunburned after 30 seconds of continuous exposure to sunlight in the sandbox. So of course, if you wanted to go in there and wander around safely, you would just drink the SPF 100 smoothie. So it would give a reason to make that smoothie. And also, I think this would add a little bit of strategy and more depth to the game because you're going to this area, and rather than just being a new area you can wander through and not have to worry about anything other than the insects, your other danger will be you're going to get thirsty faster and you could possibly get sunburned. And then last but not least is achievements. I know a lot of people are hyped for the achievements that were added to the game. I thought it was pretty cool they added them. And with each new update, I think it would make sense if they added more updates or more achievements, sorry. And the 2 that I came up with would be, I called them a leg up, which would be kill 5 centipedes. And then the second will be window dressing, and that would be craft your first glass building. So those are all the things I think could be included in the sandbox update. There were a few other suggestions I've seen, but don't fit the game in my opinion. First is a cactus. While cactus would make sense in a desert biome, you wouldn't find them in a sandbox. Next up is a lizard. A lizard would be far too large to fight in my opinion. Maybe if it acted like the koi fish, it could work, but I personally don't expect it to be added. And then last is going to be a trapdoor spider. This game has enough spiders, in my opinion, that are terrifying. Adding this one specifically would cause me to have nightmares. I could see a different type of spider in the sandbox, but hopefully not one of these. So now I'm going to turn it over to you. What do you think? Did I cover everything that you think could be inside or near the sandbox? If not, let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.